There's a moment that most people never examine, not because it's hidden, not because it's rare, because it moves too fast to be caught. It happens when the clock is running, when
we have to operate now. There is no other way.
When the weight of the situation is pressing against your chest and your brain is already moving, already deciding, before you've had the chance to ask yourself a single real question. And the strange part is this, the people who perform worst in that moment are not the ones who stopped caring. They're the ones who cared the most. They wanted to get it right. They were paying attention. They were trying, and still, something in them had already made the choice before the thinking began. This is not a story about bad decisions. It's a story about the machinery beneath the decision. The part that operates before any reflection is possible. The part that doesn't wait to be invited. The most decorated surgeon in the unit made the call wrong. Not because he was tired, not because
the decision is made. We're going in.
Not because
I need 20 cc's of mannitol ready on my count.
He made the call.
The first answer felt exactly like the right one. Cognitive ease as false signal of correctness.
Right one. It had texture. It had weight. It had a kind of internal certainty that, to the brain running under pressure, is nearly indistinguishable from being correct. So he moved. He committed. And somewhere downstream, the error was. This is not a story about incompetence. Incompetence has its own logic, its own recognizable shape. What happened here is something different and much harder to see. Inside the human mind, there are two distinct ways of processing the world. One moves fast, almost instantaneous, effortless, automatic. It scans the environment, finds patterns, generates responses, and delivers answers with remarkable confidence. The other moves slowly, deliberately, at a cost. It requires effort, attention, and a kind of sustained focus that is genuinely laborious. Here is the problem. The fast one runs almost continuously. It is not waiting for permission. It doesn't require that you ask it a question. It generates responses to questions you haven't even consciously formulated yet. By the time the slower, more deliberate process wakes up and considers taking over, the fast one has often already reached a conclusion. And that conclusion, delivered with the full sensation of certainty, acts as an anchor that the slower process will spend its energy defending rather than questioning. What pressure does is simple, almost mechanical. It depletes the conditions under which the slower process can operate. Time compression, emotional intensity, social judgment, fatigue. Each one of these reduces the availability of the deliberate thinking that might otherwise catch the error before it lands. And as that capacity shrinks, the fast process expands to fill the space. The uncomfortable part is that the person under pressure doesn't experience this as a loss of control. They experience it as focus, as sharpness, as being fully in the moment. What they call sharpness is often the sensation of moving without friction, because the slower, more careful layer has stepped back without announcing its departure.
What about the liability
Think of a room
concerns?
where three people are deciding something important, not a dramatic room, not a boardroom with mahogany.
It's now or never. We're losing time.
We can't afford any mistakes. Are you sure about this?
Look at the clock. We have to decide right now.
Kitchen, a hospital corridor, where something is being weighed and a clock is involved. One of the three has done this kind of thing many times before. His experience is real. His track record is real. And so, without anyone deciding this consciously, his first read on the situation becomes the room's first read.
The readings are stable.
Not because
we proceed exactly as planned. There is no cause for concern.
His certainty arrived
Based on the
early,
data, the procedure was entirely successful. We anticipate a full recovery ahead of schedule, barring any unforeseen complications.
To other people's nervous systems as competence. The second person in the room has a different read. She noticed something in the initial data that doesn't quite fit the dominant frame, but noticing is not the same as speaking. And speaking requires a kind of confidence that the room's current atmosphere has quietly, invisibly suppressed. The third person has stopped paying attention to the problem and started paying attention to the people. His brain, without his permission, has shifted from analysis.
If we proceed with the current protocol, the recovery time should be significantly reduced.
I agree. The data aligns with that projection.
The postures, the micro signals of agreement and dissonance. This is not weakness. This is what human brains are built to do, especially in groups.
We've considered every variable, and the conclusion is sound. We move forward with the integration strategy.
Rejected by the people around you. The decision gets made. It has the full texture of a deliberate choice. Everyone in the room is asked would say they thought it through. What none of them can fully access is how much of that thinking was the fast, automatic machinery working backwards, constructing a rationale for a conclusion it had already reached. This is the mechanism at the core of poor decisions under pressure. Not stupidity, not carelessness, the quiet, invisible dominance of the layer that moves before the reflection starts. Now here is what makes this genuinely difficult.
The data suggests a positive match.
The fast,
Recalculating
automatic
trajectory.
layer
We need to
of the
consider the
mind
following
is not
points.
broken. It is not the enemy. For most of what the mind does, reading faces, catching objects, navigating a conversation, sensing danger, it is extraordinary. It processes far more information than deliberate thinking can handle, and it does so without any felt effort. The problem is specific. It was not designed for novelty. It was not designed for ambiguity. It was not built to ask, is this situation actually different from all the situations that pattern match to give me this answer? It was built for speed and coherence, not accuracy and precision. And speed and coherence under pressure feel exactly like clarity. There's a test, 3 questions, each with an answer that feels obvious, that feels immediate, that arrives with the full sensation of correctness, and each answer is wrong. Most people, when ask these questions under even mild pressure or distraction choose the fluent, fast answer, and most people afterward cannot explain why they felt so sure. That sensation of sureness is not a signal from reality. It is a signal from internal coherence. The fast mind prefers stories that fit together smoothly. When something fits together smoothly, it generates a feeling. Something like, yes, this is right. That feeling is available information.
Mind under pressure cannot
but
make
it
the
is
distinction.
not evidence.
Trying to make the distinction between feeling right and being right, and finding it impossible.
The feeling of being right and the condition of being right is one the mind under pressure cannot easily make, because making it requires time. And slowing down when everything in the environment is pushing for a decision, when someone is watching, when delay itself feels like incompetence, slowing down is not neutral. It is experienced as a form of failure, and here is where the context becomes something more than personal.
I understand the projection, but I have some reservations about the timeline.
Organization sends invisible
As I was saying,
signals
the data
that
clearly supports this
uncertainty
approach.
is
We should move forward without
weakness,
hesitation.
that admitting doubt means losing standing, that the person who hesitates is the person who doesn't know, then you are no longer just fighting your own fast mind. You are fighting a collective pressure that rewards the appearance of confidence even when confidence is the exact wrong response to the situation. The brain, remember, is not
Whether your
only
uncertainty will be held or judged.
It
The
is
culture code
also
safety question in
continuously,
cognitive terms.
automatically reading whether you are safe here, whether your uncertainty will be held or judged, whether the people around you will close towards you if you show a crack or move away. And when the signals in the room say danger, even subtly, even unintentionally, the brain does not separate that danger from the cognitive task. It fuses them. The social threat and the intellectual uncertainty become one thing. And the response to both is the same. Move fast, be decisive, project confidence, and let the automatic layer take over completely. If you've been watching patterns like this, the way a room's atmosphere reaches inside a person's thinking before they know it's happening, and you want to keep looking at this together, consider following along. And if any of this is already landing somewhere familiar, leave a word below. That kind of recognition, when it's named, helps everyone see more clearly. Now consider this carefully. The most common response to learning about this mechanism is to want a technique, a framework, a checklist, a deliberate pause built into the process. Something that can be inserted between the impulse and the action, a kind of cognitive speed bump. And there is nothing wrong with any of it in principle. The problem is what happens in practice. Because the technique, the pause, the checklist, the deliberate question requires the slower, more effortful process to be running. And the slower process is exactly what pressure compromises. You can learn a technique for slowing down during calm conditions.
You can even genuinely
Practice
believe you've internalized
You
it.
can even believe
The analysis phase.
genuinely that you have internalized it. And then the moment arrives, the real moment, with real stakes and real-time pressure and real social exposure, and the fast layer moves before the technique can deploy. What's harder to admit
Even
is
the act of learning about this mechanism can become its own version of the same problem.
Can become its own version of the same problem. The fast mind recognizing a
Things I
concept
now know
files
feel
it under
to the
things
automatic
I
layer,
now know,
like
and
capabilities
things
I now have.
feel to the automatic layer like capabilities I now have. But knowing that you have a reflex is not the same as having changed the reflex. The brain generates a story of competence from the acquisition of information. And that
I understand this
story,
now,
I understand
so I'm less
this
vulnerable
now,
to it.
So I'm less vulnerable to it, is itself a product of the very mechanism it claims to have mastered. This is the recursion that makes the problem genuinely difficult. Not impossible, but difficult in a way that no single insight can resolve, because the gap is not in the information. It was never in the information. The gap is in the interval, that near invisible space between the moment the pressure arrives and the moment the fast mind has already answered. That space is almost always smaller than it needs to be for anything careful to take place, and making it larger is not a matter of knowing it exists. It is a matter of building, slowly through practice and repetition and failure, a relationship with that interval that the fast mind does not immediately override. Think of the kindergartners and the business school students building structures together. The business school students
If we leverage the data points here, we can optimize the entire sequence.
The projected outcomes align with the system framework.
Exactly. This is the clarity of process we
They
needed.
build sequences, they deliberated, and their structures again
failed the
and
next one again.
Look at the telemetry data here. The lateral
Because
force is minimal.
underneath
This confirms the hypothesis regarding foundational instability.
Bridging.
If you look at the data streams, the signal trends indicate a clear drop in standing from one to the
That's a reactive assessment.
Guarding against the social cost of being wrong in front of others.
We need to consider the orange layer, the real data.
But the blue overlay dictates the acceptable parameters.
But it was
You're constrained by the
happening on
monitoring
top of a
framework.
different set of signals that governed what they were actually willing to risk. The children didn't deliver. They moved, they failed fast, adjusted, tried again, stayed physically close, shared the discomfort of not knowing, and built something that held. This is not an argument for abandoning deliberate thinking. It is something more uncomfortable.
The conditions under which careful thinking can actually operate are not just internal, they are relational. They depend on what the environment, the room, the group, the culture makes safe.
They depend on what the environment, the room, the group, the culture makes safe. When these environment punishes uncertainty with loss of standing, the fast mind doesn't just run faster. The slow mind steps back entirely, not because it's lazy, because it has detected at a level below consciousness that this is not a safe place to be seen not knowing.
And so the decision gets made. The three figures, the decision made, as in the earlier scenes, but now with the full understanding of what has produced it.
Complete sensation of having thought it through. And And somewhere downstream, sometimes immediately, sometimes months later, the error becomes visible. Not the error of the person who didn't care, the error of the person who cared completely, who was paying full attention, who brought everything they had, and still arrived too late to their own thinking. There is a moment, most people have encountered it, though few have examined it closely, when something slows. Not the situation, not the deadline, not the pressure, something inside. It's subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight pause between the first impulse and whatever comes next. A fraction of a second in which, if you're paying attention, you can feel the difference between the answer that arrived and the question that hasn't been asked yet. Most people in that moment push through. The pause feels uncomfortable. It feels like hesitation, and hesitation feels like doubt, and doubt in environments that reward decisiveness feels like a kind of failure. So
Based on the current
pause
trajectory,
gets
the outcome is
closed, the
predetermined.
fast answer
We should focus
gets
resources on
forced.
phase 2 immediately.
The room moves on, but the pause
was real.
It was not weakness, it was not indecision. It was the interval in which something more accurate might have been possible. If the environment had been safe enough to hold it, if the internal pressure to appear capable hadn't immediately sealed, it shut. This is not a framework for better decisions. There is no framework here. What's here is something smaller and, in its own way, stranger. The observation that the interval exists. That the space between the impulse and the answer is not zero when it feels like zero. And that the quality of what you do in that space, which is not technique, not willpower, not intelligence, has something to do with what you've been told implicitly.
The rooms have taught you what is safe. Do not stray from what you know.
About
Be
whether
careful.
not knowing is safe, whether it's okay to be seen mid-thought, whether the pause will be met with patience or with judgment. The surgeon who called it wrong was not careless. The room that closed around the wrong answer was not full of weak thinkers. They were operating inside a machinery that moved faster than reflection in an environment that quietly, invisibly made slowing down feel like a cost none of them could afford. And that machinery is not theirs alone. It is yours, it is ours. It runs beneath every decision that feels certain. And it is running right now.
It runs beneath every decision that feels certain, the universal
ahead of
underpinning.
every answer you believe you're about to carefully choose. What you do with that, not as information, not as a concept,